This is the Accounting Influencers Podcast with Rob Brown and Martin Bissett.
Now, one of the big topics for accountants at the moment is making tax digital. It's going to hit you globally at some point. Martin, our friends at Free Agent have got something to help with here.
Yeah, I mean, if you're an accounting practice, you'll have already had a conversation at some level about how do you get your practice ready to conquer making tax digital? Well, at Free Agent, they've got a 30-minute consultation waiting for you. Each session is designed to help accountants and bookkeepers get their practices ready for the next stages of making tax digital, or MTD. And Free Agent's in-house experts will offer advice on how to segment your client base, choose the right MTD-compatible software for your practice and clients, and train and educate the team and clients on the upcoming changes. After your consultation, though, you'll receive a tailored action plan with the next steps for your practice. So, Rob, for listeners who want to get that consultation and the tailored report, where do they go?
Go to freeagent.com/AIP for the Accounting Influencers Podcast, freeagent.com/AIP, and they can book that consultation today. Hi everybody, welcome to our special guest interview today with Mike Dean. Good day, Mike.
Hi, Rob.
Mike, we are talking about R&D, the tax market, how accountants fit into that. Very briefly, in 60 seconds, just tell us how you got to where you are today.
Blimey, early career, post-MBA was all in the telecoms market. Nothing at all to do with what I'm doing today, but an involvement with a massive but failed global business about 20 years ago led me down the path of becoming an independent management consultant. And about 5 or 6 years ago, that exposed me to the R&D tax market for the first time through a client of mine. I observed some things going on in the market, and that actually led to me joining up with a couple of co-founders who've been active in that market for years.
And let's start with this phrase R&D. Is it just a UK phrase, or would people all over the world recognise that?
No, the UK R&D tax scheme is kind of replicated, I suppose, is the best way of describing it.
So R&D is what, for those people that don't know?
So research and development. So what we're talking about here is a government incentive that essentially revolves around tax rebates for companies who are doing research and development intensive work. There's a similar scheme to the one here in the UK in around 17 countries. And although they're all slightly different, legislation's different in those countries, of course, the fundamental sort of objectives of the scheme in all those countries is the same thing. It's all about trying to make the economy more competitive through investment in R&D and incentivizing that through government incentives.
So what kind of things would come under research and development for a company?
That's a great question, because everybody's expectation when they hear the term are that you're talking about laboratories with people in white coats.
Right.
The thing that the R&D tax sector is always trying to deal with is educating people, so that's actually not really what it means. It's all about essentially encouraging innovation, and innovation can lie in lots of places outside of labs with people in white coats. So it's not sector specific, although you can imagine that there are sectors that lend themselves perhaps more towards R&D than others. You're not going to be finding much R&D in retail or things like farming, for example, whereas you're much more likely to find it in, for instance, software development, pharmaceuticals, engineering, technology, those sorts of sectors.
And for R&D and innovation, you read competitive advantage, differentiation, entries into new markets.
Yes. There are sort of several key component parts, if you like, to understanding eligibility. The first one is that the company and the projects within it need to be looking for a technological advance in their particular field. And this is always a bit challenging for people to understand what does that mean. Now, sitting alongside that is also the concept of a competent professional. So in other words, the business that's, if you like, purporting to be doing R&D needs to have people in it who are people with specific qualifications and expertise in the field that they're working in. That qualifies them as a competent professional. If you've got competent professionals, you kind of first step down the line of justifying R&D. Technological advance can only be achieved by a competent professional. So that's just then about stretching the boundaries of science and technology in your particular field and working with the right people in your organization. So there's sort of several building blocks to establish an eligibility for a claim, but they're based on those initial tenets, if you like.
So how did the government get involved in this? Shouldn't companies be investing in research and development as a matter of course?
Yes, but I guess there's I suppose several layers to this. So if you're a large global blue chip business, then you are going to be investing in these sorts of things to maintain your competitive advantage. But if you're a small SME business who perhaps is, it's not quite so obvious where to invest your cash, then by the government putting incentives in place, that's encouraging businesses to think about these things. And that in the end is going to make the economy in a much more broader sense get competitive on the global scale. So it's about getting more businesses becoming more innovative rather than just having, if you like, the few at the top piling billions into it.
And when we say SME, we're just clarifying terms for our international listeners, small and medium enterprises.
Small and medium enterprise, yeah. So if we're talking in the US, we might be talking SMB. The UK government scheme has essentially two strands to it. One is the SME scheme, so it's to support those smaller businesses. The other one is the RDEC scheme, RDEC, that's Research and Development Expenditure Credit. That is for larger businesses, so businesses with over 500 employees.
Then how do accountants get involved in this? Obviously, when you mention tax, that's part of their remit, but they don't always deliver this, and they might come to WhisperClaims or other consultancies like you to get involved.
Couple of things to mention there. Inevitably, an R&D tax claim involves either revisiting a previous corporation tax return and amending it, or it's an input into the current year submission. Now, obviously, in both of those cases, that involves an accountant. It's highly likely that an accountant is going to be making that submission of the CT 600 in UK term corporation tax return to the tax authorities. So pretty much every R&D claim that's submitted will have gone through an accountant's hands. But in terms of who's put the claim together and who supported the client to put it together, that could be a whole raft of people. So you've got big consultancies, specialist consultancies in R&D. Underneath them is a whole army of smaller specialist consultants, even one-man bands. Then you've got larger accountancy practices who might have specialist teams who do this kind of work. And then as you kind of come down the stack and you get to smaller firms, let's say sub 100 employees, they may have somebody in the business who's a specialist who's perhaps had some training in this. Certainly if you get below a firm with, say, 50 employees, that is very unlikely. So at that end of the market, they're highly likely to have either outsourced to one of those bigger providers that I just mentioned, or actually, which is often the case, they just ignore it altogether. So they end up getting involved when their client comes along and says, I've had this claim done by a third party. Can you submit the amended corporation tax return for me? Now, that's problematic. And a lot of accountants at that smaller level, if you like, are now starting to resist doing that work for their clients because they'll sit there and say, well, hang on a minute, I've had no involvement in this claim. It's actually going through on my PI insurance effectively. If I amend the CT return, I'm not going to do it.
So who would come to a consultancy? Would it be the accountant themselves that might say, look, we've got a complex claim here, we don't have the expertise in-house to deal with it? Or would it be the business owner, the business client?
Both. So when I said earlier that a lot of those smaller accountancy firms are ignoring the opportunity, what that means is they're leaving their clients to go and make their own way, which generally means that those clients will be working with a specialist consultant. Our position in the market is really to give the right tools and support to those accountancy firms to enable them to do it themselves.
Because presumably it's lucrative for accounting firms to help the clients in this way.
It is, yeah. And actually, that's a good point. Generally, the R&D tax world is dominated by consultancies who are charging contingent fees. So they're charging a percentage of the tax benefit that's realised by the process.
Okay, so the bigger that is, the more they make.
Yes, exactly. Now, of course, what that also means is that price hasn't necessarily got a relationship to the amount of effort and real value add that's gone into the process.
Got it, yeah.
So over the years, I guess the kind of end user community, the companies who are making claims or doing the R&D, have started to realise that. So there's been a lot of competitive pressure in the market over the years from a price perspective. The use of technology and the area that we're focused on means that accountants can take on this kind of work without building specialist teams, without having specialist knowledge, because the tech is going to take care of that.
We know that there's been evaporation of compliance fees for accountants, so they're looking at alternative sources of revenue. So research and development and these tax schemes would come under that umbrella of advisory services, right?
And we've got a service, or we've got an app that in its own right allows the accountant to generate revenue. So when we talk to people about the shift to advisory, we find that actually the language is getting a bit mixed up. We mean actually delivering an advisory service, whereas most people who are talking about it are actually talking about data analysis.
And you'll have seen what's happening in the software vendor market, in that they're trying to marginalize accountants, and even with strong messages to business owners like, you don't need your accountant, but you work very squarely with the accountant, don't you, rather than going direct to the client?
Yes, so we don't sell to end users at all. We don't see ourselves as consultants. So our whole business model revolves around providing service to accountants, and that's in the form of our app and the service wrap that goes around that. So we've got a raft of support that helps the accountant build confidence in them going out to deliver the service.
And presumably this makes them a lot more competitive, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's giving them an extra service line. So it's giving them something else to engage their clients with. The R&D tax process is quite deep in a sense. So the discussion that you're likely to have with your client, once you've exposed the fact that they've got a likely R&D claim, is perhaps deeper than it would be with any other service. So that means it's leading to you building a much closer relationship that ultimately you'll be able to leverage other services into there and additional value.
Accounting firms particularly are looking for the people that will drive growth. And if they don't have the expertise in-house, they're going to need to turn to somebody like WhisperClaims to help them get on board.
Without technology, put that on one side for a second.
Yeah.
You're sitting there as an accountant running a small practice and you say, right, next week I want to deliver R&D tax. There's 500 pages of HMRC guidance on the scheme. So just sitting there and reading through it all is going to take you some time. So the challenge for all of these smaller firms who haven't already got dedicated resource on this is, how do you plug that gap? How are you going to build it? And that's why they then either leave it alone and let the client do their own thing, or outsource to somebody else. And then, of course, they're out of touch with that service. More pointedly, they're out of touch with that dialogue with their client. So the use of our technology is to overcome that.
How does the system actually work, briefly, Mike?
Okay, so it's a cloud-based app. It's based on a very structured question set. So you work through the questions with your client. The answer that you give to any given question determines what question you get asked next. And as you work through it, if you've got a very simple claim that doesn't go down any of the complex avenues of the legislation, you're going to whip through it really quickly. We've broken it down into very simple questions so that you almost don't even realize that the complexity of the scheme is being dealt with in the background. Once you've worked through the question set, usually sat with the clients, it's a simple button press, and the system writes a comprehensive report for you that's ready for submission to the tax authorities. You charge a monthly subscription to give access to the platform. That allows up to 10 different users onto the platform on the one license. And then we charge a download fee for each report. So you pay for the report as you download it. And I won't bore you with the detail behind it, but it's capped at £600. The website has got some really comprehensive information on there. We've got how-to guides, industry insight, several ebooks, all of which are really informative for anyone who's looking to go down this journey. So start with the website, that's whisperclaims.co.uk. Within the website, the biggest call to action that you'll see plastered all over it is book a demo. And then the last thing is, if anyone just wants to chat about what we're doing, they're interested to hear more, by all means get in touch with me directly. So that's just Mike at whisperclaims.co.uk.
Well, Mike Dean at WhisperClaims, that's been great. Thanks so much for your time and your passion today.
No problem. Thanks, Rob. It's been a pleasure.
This is the Accounting Influencers Podcast with Rob Brown and Martin Bissett.